The Silence of the Lambs, directed by Jonathan Demme, is a 1991 multiple Oscar-winning thriller, starring Jodie Foster as Clarice Starling, a top student at the FBI Training Academy, whose shrewd analysis of serial killers lands her a special assignment. The FBI is investigating a vicious murderer named Buffalo Bill who kills young women and then removes the skin from their bodies. Jack Crawford, the head of the FBI, is played by Scott Glenn, who wants Clarice to interview Dr. Hannibal Lecter, played by Anthony Hopkins, who is a brilliant psychiatrist who is also a violent psychopath serving life behind bars for various acts of murder and cannibalism. Crawford believes that Lecter may have insight into this case, and that Starling as an attractive young woman may be just the bait to draw him out. The scene that I have chosen is Hannibal Lecter's opening scene, as it not only conveys a mastery of filmmaking in itself, but also is significant to the overall film as a whole. In Lecter's 6-minute introductory scene, the director establishes a sense of Lecter's power, authority, and sophistication, all while still being presented as a terrifying character. Demme's stylistic approach in this particular scene helps to convey information in a non-verbal way, as well as contribute to the overall success of the film. The scene that Hannibal Lecter is first introduced to the audience is the one in which Clarice Starling enters the maximum security jail facility to interview the serial killer. With the intent of catching Buffalo Bill, Clarice is looking to gain insight from the brilliant, once-respected psychiatrist Lecter. The sense of power that the director imposes on Hannibal is shown as Clarice is walking through the prison to reach her subject cell. I feel as if the director purposely employs a tracking shot which allows the audience to become acquainted with the rest of the prisoners, as well as Lecter's cell where the majority of the scene takes place. His cell is the last one in the hallway and is the only cell with a glass wall instead of bars separating him from the outside world. This allows Lecter to not only be viewed as more important than the other inmates, but also does not reduce him to the status of a common criminal behind bars. Instead, he sees Clarice face to face as a normal person would, allowing him to keep his dignity while imprisoned, and thus his authority over his encounter with Clarice. As you can see, the director's mastery is put immediately on display through the use of staging, as Lecter comes into a frame of point of view shot of Clarice, since he is standing in the middle of his cell. The placement of Lecter turns the tables on Clarice, as Lecter is not at all surprised by her arrival, however she in turn is surprised by Lecter standing at attention waiting for her. This scene instantly relates to the feminist theory, as Clarice is placed on her back foot and Lecter in the power position. The upright posture that Hannibal awaits Clarice with indicates to the audience a certain air of sophistication. The stance that the camera captures is one that could resemble a soldier at attention, indicating to the audience that Hannibal is unlike any of the other prisoners and in a sense superior, once again giving off a vibe of his prevalence throughout the film. Hannibal Lecter's sense of superiority, sophistication, and importance in the film is also achieved through Demme's use of editing. Throughout the scene, the director uses many close-ups and extreme close-up shots to emphasize both characters' roles. One thing that I could not help but notice was that while Clarice is introducing herself to Hannibal, the director uses an extreme close-up shot of Hannibal while only using a close-up or even a medium close-up shot of Clarice. I think the director's shot selection was very intentional, with the intent of bringing the audience closer to Hannibal than to Clarice, and by doing this, conveying Hannibal's power over Clarice in their encounter. This allows the audience to become closer to our Lecter and ingrains his sense of importance in their minds. In addition, the director also uses a high-angle shot to further convey Hannibal's superiority over Clarice in the scene. Shortly after Clarice introduces herself to Lecter, he asks her to take a seat, which illustrates that he is the power in this encounter, and the camera angle then angles down from his perspective to be looking down at her slightly. Although this may not be overly obvious, the slight notion that Hannibal is looking down on her gives him power throughout the scene, which relates to the ultimate theory of the movie, feminism. Cinematography is another key component that contributes to the scene's overall importance in the film. Perhaps the most obvious characteristic of the lighting in the scene is the fact that Lecter's cell is very well lit compared to the other inmates, allowing him to be seen as much more flattering than the other inmates. This relates back to the notion that Lecter has a sense of sophistication to him, one that the other prisoners lack. Demme also masterfully uses three-point lighting, as Lecter has an obvious key light on him at all times and it's backlit from a high perspective. His fill lighting also varies depending on his exact position in the cell, though. The constant use of key lighting on Lecter focuses the attention of the audience on this character even more, giving him, once again, the power throughout the scene. While the cinematography lends itself to the feeling of Lecter's authority in the scene, it also conveys his terrifying nature. In regards to the setting, the surrounding walls of Lecter's cell are not what a viewer would normally expect from a movie prison. Rather than having a uniform brick wall painted in one or two basic colors, Lecter's prison wall is made of stone that are left with their natural color and basic shape, a choice that almost puts the scene in touch with nature. This makes the setting almost a metaphor for a cave, and Lecter is the fierce animal in his natural habitat and is just waiting to pounce on his prey. This notion, Lecter being synonymous with a predator waiting to pounce, ties in with the overall storyline that Hannibal Lecter is in fact a serial killer that practices cannibalism. The use of sound in the scene also contributes to the director's desired notion of fear in the character Hannibal Lecter. Although the overall sound in the scene is relatively unsophisticated, it is the simplicity that contributes to the success of making the scene terrifying. Throughout the scene, aside from the non-digitic foreboding music that plays during Lecter's monologue, the only noise that is audible throughout the scene is the hum of the ambient noise in the prison itself and the sound of the dialogue. However, the cell that Hannibal is in allows his dialogue to have a slight echo to it that gives it a sort of threatening factor. Another aspect of sound in the scene that makes it terrifying at times is the contrast between the near silence and the jumpy loud noises. For example, at one point in the scene, Hannibal is talking in a low voice while the surroundings are silent, and without warning, he places Clarice's papers in a Dropbox and slams it closed. The contrast of the silence and the loud noise is frightening and was used as a stylistic way to scare the audience. Overall, the sound throughout the scene plays a huge role in helping Hannibal Lecter establish himself as the terrifying character that he will portray for the rest of the film to come. In regards to casting choices, Jodie Foster was interested in playing the role of Clarice Starling immediately after reading the novel. However, despite Foster having just won an Academy Award for her performance in the 1988 film The Accused, Demme was not convinced that she was right for the part. Having previously collaborated on Married to the Mob, Demme's first choice for the role was Michelle Pfeiffer, who turned it down later saying, "It was a difficult decision, but I got nervous about the subject matter." As a result, Foster was awarded the role due to her passion towards the character. For the role of Dr. Hannibal Lecter, Demme originally approached Sean Connery. After the actor turned it down, Anthony Hopkins was then offered the part based on his performance in The Elephant Man. Other actors considered for the role included Derek Jacobi and Daniel Day-Lewis. I truly believe that the most memorable aspect of The Silence of the Lambs is Anthony Hopkins' incomparable performance as Lecter. Taking over for Brian Cox, who was effective but not especially memorable in his previous films, Hopkins instantly makes this role his own, capturing and conveying the charismatic essence of pure evil. As portrayed by Hopkins, Hannibal is both a suave, cultured gentleman and an unspeakable fiend. He is gracious and monstrous at the same time. In terms of Jodie Foster's interpretation of Clarice Starling, although she is not as high profile as Hopkins' work, the film wouldn't have been the same without her. In a quiet, non-flashy manner, Foster takes ownership of Clarice, transferring her into the movie's human anchor. She is our point of entry into the contorted, grotesque world of murder, insanity, and decadence. Clarice is developed into a multi-dimensional human being who is driven to succeed in a man's world, haunted by memories of the loving father she lost at an early age and fascinated by the twisted brilliance of Lecter. There isn't a false note in her performance. Foster's best scenes are the ones in which she is paired with Hopkins, such as the instance in which Clarice's facial expression crumbles almost imperceptibly, while Lecter coldly and cruelly dissects her life. It is arguable whether Foster deserved a Best Actress Oscar for her work in The Silence of the Lambs, but there is no doubt that she owed more recognition for the film's success than she often receives. In regards to the wardrobe, The Silence of the Lambs was costumed by Colin Atwood. For someone who lives an erratic and active lifestyle, Clarice would never buy clothes for anything other than functionality. The character dresses exactly as many FBI officers dress. They do not wear, and on their salaries cannot afford, designer clothes. Thus Foster's wardrobe primarily consists of combat trousers, plain tees and shirts, and a small selection of suits. In terms of Anthony Hopkins, for the role of Hannibal Lecter, he wore a boiler suit and identical white tee to fit the character of a patient in a mental hospital. In terms of audience, Demme stated that at first he wanted to be faithful to Tom Harris's text, so he wanted to work with the screenwriter Ted Tally to keep more than just the essence of the novel in the final version of the film. This resulted in a thriller with no sex, no nudity, and no overt romance. There are no car crashes, traditional chases, or stunts, yet the level of suspense remains high. In regards to target audience, the film is targeted to people ages 16 to 25 years of age. More specifically, the film appeals to young women. This is because the movie focuses on Clarice, a female hero who has to deal with the mind games of Lecter, the dangers of Buffalo Bill, and the sexual politics of being a woman in a man's world. However, being that the main character is a young, attractive female, this film also appeals to young men. In terms of form, the film consistently looks good as it builds suspense and does not outstay its welcome. This is unlike many 2-hour thrillers which have dead patches. The director also uses deceptive cutting to enhance the tension throughout the film. This is because many of the best lines are directly taken from the book while avoiding the useless details and long dialogue of the novel. As a result, the movie was less narrative and emphasized Lecter's psychotic tendency. The film also updates technology as simple changes such as phones are used instead of telegrams. Overall, I believe that the film improved the book, as Jonathan Demme's Silence of the Lambs is not only a well-known title throughout the movie industry, but represents perhaps one of the most highly regarded award-winning masterpieces ever made. In one of the earliest scenes of the film, although not the main character, one of the most important characters to the overall movie, Hannibal Lecter, was established through various directorial liberties. Within just a few minutes, Lecter's powerful yet terrifying presence is established and sets the tone for the duration of the film. Without these powerful stylistic approaches, the film would not be the great success that it continues to be known as to this day, and the slight mention of the name Hannibal Lecter would perhaps not give chills to those who know his character.